Mount Everest has been described as a graveyard in the sky. Over 300 climbers have lost their lives attempting to conquer the world's tallest peak, with nearly 200 bodies still frozen on its slopes. In the death zone, above 26,000 feet, the human body slowly shuts down. Some climbers collapse and never get up again. And over the years, many climbers have gone missing, never to be seen again. From a crypto publicity stunt gone wrong to the controversial death of a British climber, resulting in a heated legal battle, here's 4 stories of climbers who went missing on Everest. It started as a bold adventure. A group of climbers, backed by a social media company called Ask FM, set out to scale the tallest mountain in the world, Mount Everest. But they weren't just climbing for the thrill, they had a mission. At the top, they planned to bury a hard drive containing $50,000 worth of cryptocurrency. It was meant to be a publicity stunt. The idea was simple: put the tokens at the top of the world and challenge people to retrieve them. It was risky, but it was meant to grab attention. On May 14, 2018, a team of 4 climbers set off, accompanied by experienced Sherpas, including Lambabu Sherpa. Lambabu wasn't new to Everest. He had reached the summit 3 times before. Guiding climbers safely through the icy slopes and treacherous weather, he knew the dangers well. But this climb felt different. It was fast-paced, focused on the stunt. As they made their way up, the climbers pushed hard. Every step higher meant less oxygen and more exhaustion. Their goal was to reach the top, bury the hard drive, and get back down before the mountain could turn on them. Finally, they reached the summit. They buried the cryptocurrency wallet and snapped a few photos to prove they had done it. The air was thin, their bodies were weak, and they knew they had to hurry down. Clouds were gathering in the distance. A storm was coming. During the descent, the team moved quickly, but something went wrong. The Sherpas, including Lambabu, started to lag behind. The climbers pressed forward, desperate to get down before the storm hit. As they descended, they stumbled upon another climber, a man from China, in critical condition. He was barely conscious, suffering from exhaustion and the extreme cold. They couldn't leave him behind. They helped him down to Camp 4, a spot just below the summit where climbers rest before making their final push-up, or a desperate escape down. By the time they reached the camp, they realized something terrible. Lambabu was missing. No one had seen him for hours. The wind was howling, snow was whipping through the air, and temperatures dropped fast. No one had noticed Lambabu falling behind in the chaos of helping the stranded climber. The next morning, they searched. Hours passed, but there was no sign of him. Later, it was reported that Lambabu had suffered from snow blindness. It's a painful condition caused by the sun reflecting off the snow, burning the eyes. It can leave a person disoriented, unable to see, stumbling through the ice with no sense of direction. Alone on Everest, it was a death sentence. 2 days later, on May 16th, a rescue helicopter flew the climbers to safety. They were treated for frostbite and exhaustion, and soon after, they posted online. One climber, Taras Podzny, posted a photo from his hospital bed, writing that it had been an adventure and that he needed to rest. But there was no mention of Lambabu. His disappearance wasn't part of the celebration. Something was missing. No one talked about Lambabu. For days, people asked questions. What happened to him? Where was he last seen? Why didn't anyone stay behind to help? The death of Lambabu Sherpa ignited widespread outrage, with critics condemning Ask FM for prioritizing a marketing stunt over human safety. As part of a campaign to promote its initial coin offering, ICO, a fundraising event where digital tokens are sold to investors, the company sponsored a dangerous expedition to bury a hard drive containing its cryptocurrency at the summit of Mount Everest. The move was seen as reckless and exploitative, particularly given the high risks Sherpa guides face with limited recognition or protection. But despite the public backlash, Ask FM faced no legal consequences for the tragedy. The company only issued a brief statement expressing condolences but distanced itself from direct responsibility, proceeding with its ICO as planned, though the incident left a dark stain on its reputation. As days turned to weeks, Lambabu's name faded from the headlines. The cryptocurrency remained buried at the summit, but the cost of the stunt was far greater than anyone had expected. Everest had claimed another life, and this time it was for a marketing gimmick. But Everest doesn't stop. It keeps pulling climbers in, promising adventure, fame, and personal triumph. And some, like Suhajda Szilárd, seek something deeper, something only they can understand. From a young age, Szilárd was drawn to the mountains, hiking with his grandfather and spending summers camping with his school. He bought gear secondhand, took on extra shifts, and finally in 2012, he set off for his first big climb in the Himalayas. It didn't go as planned. He failed to summit Gasherbrum 1 and 2, but he didn't stop. Then, he climbed K2 solo in 2019 and Lhotse in 2022, becoming one of Hungary's top mountaineers. But Everest, the highest of them all, remained unfinished business. In 2017, his first attempt ended at 7,900 meters due to illness. He lost 15 kilos and had to turn back. In 2023, he decided it was time to try again. On May 21st, 2023, Szilárd set off from Everest Base Camp on his Kyocera Everest expedition. He aimed to summit on May 24th, climbing without Sherpas or oxygen tanks. But before he left, he wasn't feeling well. He had a deep cough, his eyes were watery, and his body was weak. Still, he pressed on. In his journal, he wrote about the mix of emotions: fear, excitement, and the longing to see his little boy again. His last known photo was taken on May 24th at 7:30 in the morning. Ben Ferrer, a climber from the Seven Summit Climbs team, was descending when he saw Szilárd resting at the balcony at 8,400 meters. Szilárd was sitting down on his mittens. Ferrer asked how he was doing. Szilárd simply replied, "Okay." He looked exhausted, but he stood up and kept moving. 6 hours later, Szilárd crossed paths with Canadian climber and filmmaker Elia Saikali. It was after 4 p.m., Szilárd was just 20 meters below the south summit, moving painfully slow. The weather was changing, the wind picked up, and darkness was closing in. Saikali knew the risks. It was too late. The summit attempt was doomed. He tried speaking to Szilárd, but he didn't reply. He just kept going, pushing himself step by step. Saikali turned back, knowing that Szilárd's chances of survival were slim. By the evening of May 25th, word reached his team at base camp that a climber was lying unconscious at 8,780 meters, just below the Hillary Step. It was Szilárd. Other climbers had seen him, barely clinging to life, suffering from frostbite and high-altitude cerebral edema. A rescue was launched immediately. Sherpas climbed through the night, hoping to bring him down, but when they reached the area the next day, he was gone. No one knew what had happened. The rescue team searched between 8,750 meters and the summit, but there was no trace of him. His GPS tracker had last signaled at 8,795 meters, just 50 meters from the top. Everest had claimed him. Days later, Sherpas searching for lost climbers found Szilárd's belongings left behind at 6,500 meters. His jacket and tent, with the logos of his sponsors still visible. No one knew why he had left them there. It was unusual to climb straight from that point, just above Camp 2. The discovery only deepened the mystery of his final climb. His wife, Taimea Legindi, also a mountaineer, made one request: to leave his body on the mountain. Everest had been his dream, his passion, and his final resting place. News of his disappearance spread across Hungary and beyond. Some called him brave, a true mountaineer who followed his passion to the very end. Others questioned his choices, climbing alone, without oxygen, without a backpack, without an emergency plan. But Szilárd had always climbed on his own terms. He knew the risks. He had faced them before. And this time, he had pushed too far. Drones were sent up to search for him, but the weather was too rough. No sign of Szilárd was ever found again. But long before Szilárd's story, another climber faced the same harsh reality of Everest. On May 13, 1999, a young British climber named Michael Matthews stood at the summit, just 22 years old. He had reached the top of the world, but 3 hours later, he was gone. Michael Matthews came from a wealthy London family, and he was the son of self-made millionaire David Matthews. He was ambitious, driven, and full of life. At a young age, he had already found success as a trader in the city of London. But his dreams were bigger. Climbing Everest had always been on his mind, and when his friend Jamie Everett handed him an article about the mountain, the challenge became real. Michael decided he would do it. He would stand on the highest point on Earth. Michael joined an expedition organized by OTT Expeditions, a guiding company based in Sheffield. They had a solid record. 29 climbers had made it to the top with them, all safely. The cost of the climb was $40,000, a small price for the ultimate adventure. His father, wanting to ensure his safety, even joined him for a training climb on Aconcagua. But after realizing his own health wouldn't allow him to climb Everest, he placed his trust in the guides of OTT expeditions to bring his son back home safely. The climb began in early May 1999. Michael, wearing his red North Face down suit and black boots, was ready. He moved steadily up the mountain, through the ice falls and ridges, pushing higher and higher. On the morning of May 13th, he stood on the summit with his guide, Mike Smith. They had made it. But the summit is only halfway. The descent is where the real danger lies. 3 hours after reaching the top, the weather changed. Gale force winds roared in, and snow blinded the climbers. It was then that Michael disappeared. He was last seen around 200 to 300 meters above the balcony, struggling against the storm. Some say he became disoriented and stepped off the route. Others believe he was blown off the ridge by the fierce winds. The truth remains unknown. Back at base camp, the news hit hard. His family was devastated. They wanted answers. They wanted to know what happened to their son. But answers didn't come easily. Michael's disappearance quickly turned into a heated legal battle. His family believed his guides in the deadly storm had abandoned him. They filed lawsuits against OTT expeditions and 3 of their guides, Nick Kikus, Martin Doyle, and Mike Smith. 2 months after his death, troubling claims surfaced. Fellow climbers reported issues with the expedition's oxygen equipment. 2 Canadian climbers, Dave Rodney and Dennis Brown, said the oxygen systems were faulty and not up to the promised standards. They even claimed that one of the guides, Nick Kikus, had tried to hit Michael with an oxygen tank in frustration. OTT expeditions strongly denied the allegations. They insisted that Michael was well aware of the risks involved in climbing Everest and that their equipment had been tested and proven. They argued that once the storm rolled in, survival was a matter of experience and luck. In the years that followed, the Matthews family continued to fight for answers. They demanded an investigation into the guiding company's safety practices and even considered filing lawsuits against more of the guides involved in the expedition. The legal battle dragged on for years, but no clear answers ever emerged. Michael's 2 brothers, James and Spencer Matthews, found a different way to honor his memory. They created the Michael Matthews Foundation, a charity dedicated to supporting educational projects in Africa and Asia. The foundation helps build schools and provide resources for children in remote areas, a cause Michael deeply cared about. In 2022, Spencer Matthews decided to take things further. He set out on a personal mission to find his brother's body, retracing Michael's final steps on Everest. His journey was documented in the Disney Plus film Finding Michael. The expedition was supported by adventurer Bear Grylls and mountaineer Nirmal Purja, who led a specialized search team into Everest's notorious death zone, where Michael was last seen. Spencer, who was just 10 years old when his brother vanished, described Michael as everything to him and hoped the search would bring closure to their family. During the making of the documentary, Spencer uncovered footage of Michael's 1999 climb that he never knew existed. The video was shared by Dave Rodney, a Canadian climber who had been with Michael on the expedition. Rodney, who called Michael the best mate I could ever have hoped for on the mountain, was honored to be part of the film and to share his memories of their time together. Over the years, a few climbers, including Dave Rodney, reported seeing possible traces of Michael near the balcony, around 8,400 meters. Some mentioned spotting a silver metal ice axe en route near a steep drop, raising hopes that his remains might still be found. Despite multiple search attempts, including Spencer's well-organized expedition, Michael's body has never been recovered. Everest, it seems, wasn't ready to give him back. But Michael wasn't the only climber Everest refused to return. In October 1988, 4 Slovak climbers, Dusan Becik, Peter Bozik, Jaroslav Jasko, and Josef Just, set out to conquer Everest's most difficult route, the Bonington route on the southwest face. Unlike other expeditions, they chose to climb in alpine style. No supplementary oxygen, no fixed ropes, and no Sherpa support. It was a bold and dangerous approach, but they believed in their strength, their skill, and each other. They arrived at Everest Base Camp in early September 1988, joined by climbers from the United States, France, and South Korea. The teams already on the mountain had fixed ropes through the dangerous Khumbu icefall, but they demanded fees to use them. The Slovaks, determined but short on money, negotiated. The French agreed to share their ropes, and the Americans only asked for equipment in return. The South Koreans, however, wanted something more. The Slovaks had to promise to fix ropes up to Lhotse in exchange for access. By late September, the team was ready. For acclimatization, Besic and Just summited Lhotse, the fourth highest peak in the world. It was a strong start, and it gave them confidence for what lay ahead. On October 12th, they left base camp and climbed to Camp 2 at 6,400 meters. The real challenge began 2 days later, when they left Camp 2 at 3 a.m. and started their Alpine-style push-up Boningtons hard way. They called in by radio at 6 p.m. They had reached 8,100 meters, but were moving slower than expected. The ice was harder than they thought, and progress was tough. They set up their first bivouac for the night. The next morning, they faced the hardest part of the climb, a steep rock wall rated at the highest levels of difficulty. It took them the entire day to climb just 200 meters. They reported no health issues, but exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. On October 16th, as they crossed a snowfield toward the south summit, the cracks in their strength started to show. Besic was vomiting and lagging behind. They had to set up another bivouac at 8,600 meters. Over the radio, they assured the team below that everything was fine, but they were exhausted. On the morning of October 17th, they left their bivouac and pushed for the south summit at 8,760 meters. Hours later, at 1:40 p.m., Just made a radio call from Everest's true summit, 8,848 meters. He was alone. He didn't know where Bosic and Jasko were. He reported strong winds and worsening visibility. Calls kept coming over the next few hours. By 3 p.m., Just was at the south summit, but Besic wasn't there as expected. He was alone again. His voice was slowing, his speech slurred. He was losing sight and struggling to stay focused. By 4 p.m., Just finally found Bosic and Jasko. They were all disoriented and struggling with snow blindness. In the last known call at 5:30 p.m., Just said they were halfway down to the south call and Besic had rejoined them. But things were bad. Jasko was too tired to move. Just's voice was weak, but he promised to call again once they reached the south kernel. That call never came. A group of American climbers and Sherpas were at the south col, watching for any sign of them, but they saw nothing. The storm was closing in. Winds were reaching speeds of 160 kilometers per hour. The mountains swallowed the Slovak team whole. On the morning of October 18th, the Americans searched the area but found no sign of them. The leader of the Slovak expedition, Ivan Fiala, offered a massive reward to Sherpas willing to climb up and search, but no one dared to face the brutal storm. Days passed. The mountain was silent. There were no traces of the four climbers. They had vanished into the snow and ice, leaving behind only questions. Years later, their story became legendary because the Bonington route on the southwest face is considered one of the hardest climbs on Everest, with steep ice walls, treacherous rock faces, and deadly exposure to the elements. The Slovak team didn't just attempt it, they climbed it in alpine style, without supplementary oxygen, fixed ropes, or Sherpa support, a level of difficulty that magnified the risk tenfold. Climbers around the world spoke of their bravery and determination. No one has attempted the Bonington route in alpine style since then. It remains one of Everest's greatest unsolved mysteries. How close they were to survival, what went wrong in those final hours, and if they could have made it back. Their memorial stands at Everest Base Camp, a reminder of what they achieved and what they lost.